Hello everyone, welcome back to my Uma Musume video. Yeah, just kidding. This is a Yoimiya-Ineffa video. So, Ineffa banner just dropped 2 weeks ago and it's going away real soon, and this video will focus on showcasing Yoimiya Overvape with Ineffa. I won't go into depth about Ineffa herself, so if you want a good coverage about her kit and her numbers, you can just check out Genshin guide makers and theory crafters out there. So Ineffa is basically what Yoimiya mains wish Beidou to be. She has the shield, she deals a great amount of AoE damage, and she also buffs your Yoimiya's EM. She's tied to Electro Charge reaction, so obviously she won't be a good sub DPS for Shiver's team. Because of course, why buff Yoimiya's niche when you can give another premium support to the same Hydro-oriented characters for the 20th time? So this team works similarly to Yoimiya Overvape with Fischl, but there are two important differences you have to know. 1. Fischl has snapshot ability, so she needs to cast her skill or burst after getting her buffs. Ineffa, on the other hand, is unable to snapshot buffs like older characters. Therefore, it doesn't matter whether she casts her skill or burst within Bennett Circle or not. Her skill will deal damage based on her current stats. Number 2. Ineffa's passive grants EM bonus to on-fielders after casting her Elemental Burst, and it lasts for 20 seconds. Since this buff lasts longer than Yoimiya's team rotation, you want to cast her burst before Bennett's burst. This way, she won't take away Bennett's buff duration from Yoimiya, and Yoimiya will still have the EM buff for an entire rotation. But just in case you are in desperate for AoE coverage, you can just use Ineffa's burst on Bennett's circle. Since Bennett's buff lingers for several seconds, Ineffa will also have a buff Lunar Charge reaction for the first 5 seconds after she swaps out. So, for Yoimiya-Ineffa Overvape, you want to start your rotation by casting Ineffa's elemental skill right before your Hydro sub DPS, so you can trigger some Lunar Charge damage in your team setup phase. In this footage, for example, I managed to get 5 Lunar Charge reactions before Yoimiya even starts her rotation. After Ineffa's elemental skill and Hydro sub DPS skills, you want to go back to Ineffa to cast her burst and activate her EM buff. After that, you cast Bennett's burst and Yoimiya will start her rotation. You can swap Bennett and Ineffa's setup order if you really need to clean some multi-target waves where AoE damage is really needed. So that's all for the Yoimiya-Ineffa Overvape team introduction. For the first part, I will showcase Ineffa with various wall arms. Please note that I am using my viewers' accounts and not everyone owns every single pole arm in the game, so let's get started. From what I've seen, I think Missive Wind Spear is just a great option for Yoineffa, and it's just easy to trigger because all she needs to do is to trigger reactions. Since the account I'm using doesn't have her signature, I have to showcase her signature versus 4-star weapon comparison on another viewer account on the later part of the video. But before that, why don't we compare Yoineffa to Fischl first? I think this is the main question we have for Yoineffa. How much does she improve Yoimiya's overall fate? Let's just jump into it. So based on the part 2 showcase, I think I can safely say that Ineffa actually improves Yoimiya's overweight team. Remember that aside from her current personal damage and shield compared to Fischl, we haven't got her not cry artifact set yet. Not only that, 5-star characters like Yoineffa can use her signature 5-star weapon, which increases the gap between her and Fischl. This also doesn't count her vertical investment potential through her constellations yet. However, you saw that my Yoineffa run was slower than Fischl overweight run on Kongamato. There are several factors that contributed to the slow run. The first one is my energy management. To be fair, 5.7 Spiral Beast lineup didn't give as much energy refund as 5.8 Spiral Beast lineup where you face multiple enemies with great amount of energy refund. Fischl is also known to give a lot of energy, which helps the team to reserve more energy for the last chamber. Having problem with energy uptime, burst uptime, and skill uptime massively affects the flow of the team rotations and timings with enemy movesets. The second one was the chamber being very single target oriented. Surely, there are some Yumkasa or minions that serve as AoE part of the chamber, however, Kongamato is still the biggest part of the chamber. Yoineffa's biggest advantage over Fischl is that she grants Yoimiya interruption resistance and access to Lunar Charge, which are great for AoE scenario, but Fischl is still a great single target sub-DPS with snapshot ability. Therefore, in this chamber, the damage gap between the two is much closer than multi-target scenario. That being said, Yoimiya Overload is still ahead because it's her perfect synergy team, which is still not getting any upgrade from its old 4-star unit limitations. So moving on to the next part, I'll showcase Yoineffa with her signature weapon versus 4-star weapon. Reminder that since the count doesn't have a max level Missive Wind Spear, I had no choice but to use Tamayurate instead. The only difference between the two teams is Yoineffa's weapons. So let's see how much gap the teams have. So that's it for the signature weapon versus 4-star weapon comparison. In my opinion, Yoineffa's weapon is definitely a good upgrade for your team, but I don't think that you'll lose a lot of damage without it. The account owner is from American server while I'm an Asian player, so I had to play 250 ping. Therefore, the run could have been optimized, but I think I've done well enough for this part. But hey, Yoimiya and her teammates are still using 5-star weapons. That's not so FTB friendly. Well, sure, I actually recorded another run with Yoimiya on full 4-star weapons versus full 5-star weapons. But look, I don't know what your F2P standards are, but I cannot change any of the teammates. I think having full 4-star weapons is already F2P friendly enough for all character standards. So let's see how it turns out. think it is very clear that the more investment you have, the wider the performance gap is. At the end of the day, Yoineffa is a great quality of life upgrade for Yoimiya over Raid, and she is a really nice addition to your roster. Her team is not better than Yoimiya's existing teams, but don't focus too much on DPS sheets. People have been focusing too much on how much increase any new support gives to existing characters' peak DPS teams, but I've told you before on my Yoimiya team guide. Number 2. Elemental checks are getting way harder nowadays, so it is necessary to provide Yoimiya all coverage teams to counter these elemental checks. Number 3. Please start focusing your pulls on Yoimiya's best teams as soon as possible. Genshin in 2025 had been pushing new character sales by giving us tons and tons of elemental checks. So I believe that Electro Charge will have lots of matchup advantage and buffs for at least 2 or 3 patches before they move on to sell newer characters. If you can't get Yoineffa and struggle on the next few patches, I think that's okay. That's just what our game has become, and I don't want you to feel forced to pull for any character. But I need to tell you that the current banner is the best possible banner for Yoimiya players. For the most existing characters in current banners are all useful for Yoimiya except Sethos. Citlali C2 is really strong, C6 Fischl is needed for overall team to be good, and Xingqiu is an option for new players without Yelan or Furina. I'm sorry that this video is uploaded on the last day and it might be late at this point, but I hope that this video will be useful for you guys. Now, for the last showcase, I will show you something really interesting.